Welcome to Holy Voices, where timeless truth meets your present journey. If you are here, it is not by accident. Your spirit was led to this place for a reason. Every word you will hear carries light, strength, and direction for your path. Stay with us, and let this message unlock the wisdom waiting inside you. Your seed may leave your hand, but it never leaves your life. Sow $20 or more into Holy Voices and watch God bring a harvest. Stop deceiving yourself about what has been taking on right in front of your eyes, chosen one. You have been surrounded by breadcrumbs of truth from the universe, and you are well aware of the time. We both know that the cosmic balances are going to tip in ways that will leave them rushing to explain away what they've sown, even if they continue to play their little games, wear their masks, and spin their stories. Pretend, but you understand that it's karma. Greetings from a world that benefits from your spiritual sleep, where you are a chosen one. They never explain to you that karma isn't limited to the guilty. When the time comes, you will be able to collect what is owing to you. It's well past time for your collection day. That individual who has been orbiting your energies like a vulture over new prey is where the first thread begins. You are well aware of the person I am referring to. The person who mysteriously knows your next move before you've fully made it, and who always seems to have insider knowledge about your company. They have been observing you, analyzing your trends, and identifying your weaknesses, not to help you, but to take advantage of them. Something else has been watching them while they've been watching you. One ledger has been selected by the universe. Additionally, every instance of deceit, manipulation, and attempt to darken your light has been documented, with interest compounded every day. Allow me to depict the final months or perhaps years of your life for you. Because there are several parallel timelines in this novel, and they are all going to collide in ways that will leave you gasping. The energy harvest is the first timeline. Someone, possibly several someones, has positioned themselves near enough to take advantage of your light while also attempting to dull it. This is not an accident. This is strategic spiritual warfare. Additionally, you have unknowingly contributed to their energy economy. Consider the individual who constantly seems to require a bit more from you. The friend that disappears when you're celebrating but calls when they're drowning. The coworker who somehow receives credit for concepts that you came up with. The relative that treats family get-togethers as if they are the main act and you are the opening act. They made a crucial mistake. They thought you had an endless supply. They thought you would never realize what was going on. They made a mistaken assumption. They were unaware that you were gathering data while they were occupied with pretending to have a superiority complex. Every encounter that left you exhausted but for some reason you were unable to explain. During every conversation, they were able to minimize your difficulties while demanding quick attention and sympathy for their tiny inconveniences. Every time they presented themselves as the authority on your life and gave you uninvited advice that somehow always worked out better for them than for you. For a long time, you assumed it was merely a coincidence, a case of unfortunate timing, or your imagination because the pattern was so delicate and well planned. Perhaps you were being overly needy, overly sensitive, or both. They were experts at tricking you into doubting your own sense of reality, manipulating you, gaslighting you under the pretext of mentoring, and so on. Even as your conscious mind was justifying their actions, your subconscious was keeping score. Because of this, even when nothing obviously bad happened, several exchanges left you feeling bewildered and exhausted. You would therefore feel somehow smaller after speaking with them. Your energy body was registering attacks that your mental body was not yet ready to identify, even when they had been encouraging. You see, they had a method, a methodical approach that they had most likely applied to others before you and were fully prepared to apply to others after you. Step 1. Find someone who possesses natural abundance, real spiritual gifts, or genuine compassion. Step 2. Present themselves as essential to that individual's prosperity or contentment. The third step is to establish a dependency dynamic in which the selected individual feels compelled to give their opportunities, resources, or energy. Step 4. gradually take away what they require while returning just enough to maintain the chosen individual's investment. It's parasitism wrapped in collaboration and vampirism cloaked in friendship. The rejection cycle is the second timeline. At the same time, your life has been following another pattern. The game of strategic rejection. Someone has been manipulating your emotions, establishing a pattern of approval and rejection that was intended to keep you continuously looking for their approval. To see you get back up after being knocked down, they would do it. For them, it was sport. They would disregard you, reject you, and make you feel inferior before watching you struggle to establish your value. They would then knock you down again just as you were about to win their approval. You always regained your strength when they knocked you down. You become more resilient with each rejection. In reality, every time they caused you to doubt your value, they were training you to see it on your own. Unbeknownst to them, they were training their own substitute. This cycle of rejection wasn't only painful. The conditioning was strategic. They needed you to connect hardship with acceptance, camaraderie, and love. They wanted you to think you had to always prove yourself for everything worth pursuing. They wanted you to believe that ease and calm were a sign that you weren't working hard enough. The most pernicious aspect is how they enabled you to participate in your own devaluation. They taught you to read their emotional weather patterns, predict their moods, and modify your behavior according to their implicit expectations. You turned into a spiritual contortionist, bending yourself into any shape that would win their acceptance, even if only momentarily. However, they failed to consider the cumulative impact of their manipulation. You learned something important about the distinction between real connection and artificial dependency from each cycle of optimism and disappointment. You were learning to find internal affirmation each time they punished you by denying you their attention. However, each time they made you feel inadequate, you were actually finding strength you were unaware you had. At some point, every skilled manipulator overplays their hand. They mistakenly believe they can push indefinitely without facing any repercussions after getting intoxicated on their own. They stop being cautious about concealing their genuine intentions because they are so sure of their power. And that's precisely what took place here. The third-party triangulation is the third timeline. There was another level of manipulation going on at the same time as all of this. In order to make you feel expendable and replaceable, someone has been arranging third-party situations, fostering competition where none should exist, and introducing other individuals into your relationships. They have been pitting many individuals against one another, taking advantage of the confusion and mayhem like a spiritual vampire at an all-you-can-eat buffet. However, the cosmos was forming its own triangle, the one it had selected. Authentic relationships were aligning in your path while they were fabricating competition for their attention. People who would never consider forcing you to compete for even the most basic respect were already matching your frequency because real people know what true is. Because it attacks both your vision of reality and your sense of self-worth, the triangulation technique is arguably the most advanced kind of emotional manipulation. When an individual brings outsiders into your connection, they're basically deceiving you about how important you are to them. They're making you wonder if you're just one of many interchangeable alternatives or if your connection is unique. They typically pick the outsiders on purpose to make you feel insecure. They will bring in someone who is conventionally attractive if you are self-conscious about your appearance. They'll introduce someone with excellent qualifications if you're not confident in your intelligence. People will brag about someone who seems to be doing well if you're insecure about your accomplishments. Under the cover of social networking, it is psychological warfare. In reality, what they're doing is making their devotion and attention seem scarce. Instead of being plentiful energies that naturally flow between aligned spirits, they want you to think that love, friendship, and recognition are scarce commodities that must be fought for. They want you to believe that getting their approval is so important that it's worth fighting for. Additionally, the triangulation has another function. It keeps you from developing genuine, direct interactions with the other parties.
You are positioned as their competitor rather than as someone with whom you may truly relate. You're caught in a web of fabricated rivalry rather than creating a network of support. You're taught to see threats everywhere rather than possible allies. People that work from abundance rather than lack are drawn to your genuine energy while they're busy planning this phony rivalry. The universe is matching you with souls who realize that genuine connection doesn't need rivalry while they're fabricating drama. Comparing yourself to others is not necessary to convince the individuals who are truly meant to be in your life of your value. To get their respect, you don't have to beat rivals. They can decide who is worthy of their attention without the necessity for complex contests. They instantly and genuinely see your worth without any games, tests, or formalities. It was never intended for you to travel this route by yourself. There's more to the obsidian inner order than meets the eye. It is a haven for the awakened, the exiled, and those who have been abandoned for their truth and gaslighted for their abilities. We get together live on Zoom once a week. Stories of transformation from real individuals with genuine faces. A healer who overcame ritual abuse and discovered their power, a former CFO who accepted their psychic skills, and a seer who liberated themselves from religious oppression. We're joined by dozens of others who have been through exactly what you have. Your spiritual family is this group. I will never abandon you. I will never allow you to experience this enlightenment by yourself. I will never ignore your pain as if it were a sign of disdain. You were not punished by being banished from the normal world. For us in the family that chooses you back, it was a prelude to this. Family, we are on the way to 40,000 subscribers. Every like, every comment, every subscription is a brick in this foundation of faith. Be part of Holy Voices today. Click the link in the description to join the Obsidian Inner Order. This is the point at which the increasing action achieves its crescendo and these timelines begin to converge. Recently, something changed. Perhaps it was a steady burn that eventually reached a breaking point, or perhaps it happened all at once. You began to pose new queries. You began by asking why I'm vying for someone's attention who obviously doesn't see gold when it's there in front of them, rather than why they don't respect me. They're going to lose everything they've built on your lowered sense of value, not just their source of power. Look, you've picked one. You were preoccupied with wondering if you were being overly sensitive, if you were asking for too much, or if you should just be content with the meager attention they gave you. They were constructing their whole perception of self-worth based on your readiness to settle for less than you are worthy of. They lacked genuine confidence. It was parasitic, taking advantage of your lack of confidence. They made you believe that their league was superior to yours, but in reality, there was never a league. There were individuals playing pretend with smoke and mirrors, and you were the only one working from a place of real substance. In actuality, they had been reaching down to drain you, but they wanted you to think you were reaching up to touch them. Do you recall how they used to dictate the cadence of your partnership? How they would decide when you were deserving of their time and attention, how they would set the tempo, and how deep they would go. They established a routine in which you were always pursuing, proving, and making money. Here's what they didn't expect, though. You would eventually become weary of getting back up for their amusement. You would eventually discover that the game was rigged and that the only way to win was to abstain from playing. You gave up chasing, then. You ceased your self-explanation. People should have been battling to keep you at their table, but you stopped fighting for scraps. Their true panic struck at that point. Because their whole identity began to fall apart without you acting as the enthusiastic supplicant. Timeline 1 and Timeline 2 collide at this point, with disastrous results. Your energy harvester suddenly discovers that their supply line has been cut. The individual who has been engaging in rejection games is abruptly rejected, passively, rather than actively, which is worse in some ways. They can't compete with your own self-respect, which has taken their position. They don't just quietly come to terms with this new reality. Oh no, the one that was selected. A spiritual predator does not simply locate a new hunting area when they discover that their food source is no longer available. They get more intense. They adjust. Their methods of manipulation get increasingly inventive. They now have to persuade not just you but also everyone else that they are the victim in this situation, which is when the pretending reaches its most advanced degree. They develop into skilled storytellers who build tales about your transformation, your unpleasant demeanor, and your sudden breakup or partnership. They portray themselves as the bewildered, wounded party who merely wishes to know what went wrong. But if you pick one, this is where your superpower originates from the accumulated data I said previously. You've already seen this film. Their patterns are familiar to you. Even when the manipulation techniques are presented in attractive bundles of worry and perplexity, you can still spot them. It's easy to identify guilt-tripping masquerading as real concern. The love bombing disguised as newly discovered appreciation is easily recognized. Through shared friends, they will attempt to re-enter your life, obtaining information about your present circumstances and searching for vulnerabilities they can take advantage of. They will suddenly become interested in your passions in an attempt to open up new avenues for chance meetings. They will create emergencies that call for your specialized expertise or abilities in the hopes that your empathy would triumph over your ability to set boundaries. Some may even go so far as to fabricate circumstances in which they seem to be prospering without you in an attempt to arouse your competitive nature or fear of missing out. They'll post about incredible possibilities, new connections, or life transitions that seem to be intended to make you wonder if leaving was the correct decision. The frequency from which those strategies were intended to manipulate you has changed. When they begin to appropriate aspects of your growth path and pass them off as their own discoveries, the pretending achieves its zenith. All of a sudden, they have an interest in personal growth, spirituality, and healing. In an attempt to speak your new language well enough to regain access to your energy field, they begin employing the language they learnt from observing your progress. However, they are unable to fake the chosen one. They are able to imitate the words, but not the vibration. They are able to replicate the actions, but not the intent. They are unable to create the transition, but they can act as though they comprehend the path. Anyone in a position of genuine authority can see that pretend is not real. Things get pretty fascinating in Timeline 3, which is still ongoing. Something lovely has been taking place in your world while they have been frantically trying to reconstruct their house of cards. Do you recall those real connections I told you about? They began arriving exactly on time. They began to reap unexpected benefits from the course you took, the one that was too therapeutic for their comfort. Your intuition became really keen. You developed an almost magical capacity to see through manipulation. Since spiritual vampires were no longer stealing your energy, you began to draw real possibilities and real connections. People began to view you in a different way. It's because you altered your frequency, not because you altered your circumstances or appearance. At this point, all three timelines come together to form a cosmic justice storm. The individual who has been observing you suddenly becomes aware that they are being observed. Now, the person who has been ignoring you is frantically trying to get your attention. As you establish sincere relationships with others who appreciate what you have to offer, the person who has been planning triangulation finds themselves alone and observing from a distance. If not exactly the same person, they are all the same person. They all follow the same blueprint and have the same purpose in your spiritual development. Even though they never meant to teach you anything other than acquiescence, they were all teachers, chosen ones. In reality, everyone who treated you as though you were unworthy was only revealing their own shortcomings. In reality, they were only displaying their incapacity to see value whenever they made you feel rejected. In reality, they were proving why they shouldn't have access to it every time they made you doubt your value. The cosmic joke is that you were busy becoming a league unto yourself while they were busy trying to convince you that you weren't in their league. A league where approbation is less important than sincerity. Where comfort is subordinated to growth. Where respect for one another is not the ultimate goal but rather the minimum. but selected one. Because spiritual predators are adapting and the game is about to alter in ways you need to be ready for, this awakening comes with higher stakes. They're going to return with fresh tactics. Because they are, some people will approach you with business offers that seem too good to be true. Others will create heartbreaking tales that are intended to overwhelm your judgment and awaken your compassion. Some may even try to exploit new acquaintances as leverage, trying to establish competition and triangulation where none previously existed. That first timeline reappears here with a vengeance. Remind yourself of the individual who has been observing you and analyzing your habits. They've been making notes, and now they're going to apply all of the knowledge they gained about your weaknesses while they had your energy. Expensive presents with unseen conditions will be offered. In order to entice you back into their dysfunctional web, they will fabricate complex circumstances. Since direct manipulation is no longer effective, the sophisticated predator will attempt indirect methods. Given that family dynamics have the power to transcend your personal boundaries, they may attempt to contact you through your family members. In an attempt to intertwine your livelihood with their purpose, they may establish contact with your professional network. They may even try to pollute the wells of your new relationships before you can drink from them. The universe is planning their exposure on several levels while they're busy plotting to take back control of your energy. They triangulated you with that individual. They are beginning to notice similar trends. They used that coworker as leverage to claim credit for your effort. They're starting to doubt the story they were told. They turned against you because of that family member. They are observing discrepancies in the narrative. Truth is wonderful because, no matter how deeply buried it is, it always finds a way to come to the surface. When the manipulator no longer has your energy to support it, their web of falsehoods begins to fall apart. The other performers begin to recognize the script for what it truly is when you stop acting out your part in their drama. And this is the point at which their deception starts to actively harm their reputation in addition to being ineffectual. The manipulator's fake performance is apparent like a neon sign in the middle of the day when you're acting with genuine authority and surrounded by people who see your worth. It's clear how desperate they are. Their tactics become apparent. Their actual nature is exposed in vivid detail. They'll try more and more frantically to get back into your life. In an attempt to refute your version of events, they might spread untruths regarding your mental health. They may try to ruin your new chances, thinking that if they can make you struggle, you would turn to them for help. They may even use more dramatic strategies, such as unexpected crises that demand your urgent attention, health worries that make you feel sorry for them, or changes in your life that appear to be intended to guilt you into becoming involved again. A selected one. In reality, every desperate action they do is proof of the power you've taken back. Their fear is evidence of your development. They use their methods to prove that you were worth fighting for. They have nothing real to give, so they're just fighting dirty. Recall all of the times you were knocked down and then got back up. Faith without works is dead, James 2 verse 26. Put your faith into action through a $50 seed into Holy Voices today. There was a purpose to all that training. You learned to recognize patterns. You became adept at spotting manipulation. You were so tolerant of rejection that you were no longer influenced by their acceptance. The climax is this. Selected one. Everything that has been accumulating finally erupts into the open here. The individuals that are currently entering your life are functioning on the same frequency that you have raised. They can obviously perceive your worth, so they don't need you to demonstrate it. Since they have an equal stake in the relationship, they don't need you to try to get their attention. They're providing the entire meal, so you won't have to compete for scraps. This change will generate conversation. There will be opinions regarding your new standards from those who assumed you were always available. They will label you choosy, difficult, and altered. They will attempt to instill guilt in you for rejecting their ideal of friendship, love, or collaboration. They will portray themselves as the victims of your development. Without them, you're thriving rather than just getting by. Despite their displeasure, the achievement they said was unattainable without their permission is actually occurring. You're finding the connections they said you wouldn't find. Your life is organically filled with the abundance they said was out of your grasp. You're no longer even attempting to convince them of anything. Your accomplishment isn't an attempt to exact revenge on your former self. It's just the inevitable outcome of someone at last acting from their own power rather than from a place of desperation and lack. Do you recall the feeling of knowing I described at the beginning? That feeling that something wasn't quite right, that you were being played, that there was a game going on surrounding you that you weren't really conscious of. Your intuition was attempting to alert you to what was going on. It served as the universe's early warning system, telling you that individuals were harvesting your energy without intending to return the favor. However, you can now use that same user-friendly system as a navigation tool to find opportunities and connections that match your enhanced frequency. The discernment that made you practically impervious to manipulation has replaced the sensitivity that left you open to manipulation. They will attempt to mimic your new language and enthusiasm once they see that their old strategies aren't working. All of a sudden, they are discussing healing, boundaries, and genuine connections. They will attempt to guilt you back into their web by using the very ideas you have accepted as weapons. They will accuse you of not letting people grow, of being unforgiving, and of leaving them when they are in need. You now understand the distinction between performance art and true transformation. You are aware that genuine development occurs gradually over time through continuous acts rather than in abrupt, dramatic announcements meant to reclaim someone's energy. You've learned to recognize the difference between sincere apologies and deceptive ones. When you understand that their desperate attempt to keep control over you is actually keeping them from forming real connections elsewhere, the karma component becomes very evident. They're passing up chances for genuine relationships while they're preoccupied with what they lost. Life is going on without them as they plot to take back their previous place in your life. They're acting like they're changing for you, but they're still essentially the same for everyone else. Even your attention is no longer on their retribution. You're too busy enjoying what you deserve to wait for others to receive what they deserve. Since you're celebrating your accomplishments, you're not keeping tabs on their mistakes. Since you're focused on your own development, you're not keeping an eye on their difficulties. The end result of their behavior is this apathy, this total emotional detachment from their drama. They never learned to exist without being needed because they tried so hard to make you need them. They never learned to be enough on their own because they spent so much effort trying to convince you that you weren't enough. They lost contact with reality itself because they spent so much money trying to keep control over how you saw it. Now they are mainly acting for the benefit of their dwindling audience, but the pretending is still going on. They must continue to pretend that they are doing well, that they have moved on, and that your absence has no bearing on them. The one selected. You live behind the curtain, so you can see through the performance. You are aware of the distinction between their desperation in private and their public demeanor. Once dispersed across a dozen unworthy individuals, the energy is now focused and concentrated. Once freely given to those who wasted it, the love is now prudently invested in those who value it. Creating value that speaks for itself has replaced the time spent trying to persuade others of your value. They simply couldn't cope with this. You remembered, not that you changed. You recalled that someone's incapacity to see your worth does not diminish it. You recalled that who certifies your value does not define it. You recalled that even though you voluntarily placed your power in their hands, it was never truly there. Every barrier you uphold allows others to establish their own. Every criterion you refuse to compromise demonstrates to others what is feasible. You always pick your calm above their mayhem. You're playing a part in a shift in consciousness that extends well beyond your personal experience. Those who attempted to minimize you did more than simply undervalue you. They failed to account for the repercussions of someone asserting their entire authority. They believed they were dealing with another individual that they could control and influence. They were unaware that they were tampering with the fate of a chosen one. Despite your difficulties, you were not selected. They are the reason you were selected. In reality, everyone who undervalued you was setting you up for something they couldn't have predicted. In reality, every circumstance that attempted to shatter you strengthened your will to disrupt generational norms. Every instance of feeling inadequate helped you realize that, when the time came, you were more than enough. They are not being punished by the karma they are currently dealing with. It is simply the inevitable result of tampering with spiritual law. Energy is constantly looking for equilibrium. We'll repay what was taken. We'll give what was denied. We'll deliver what was postponed. Thus, keep this moment in mind when they return, and they will return with their stories of change and transformation. Remind yourself of the clarity that is currently coursing through you. Recall the tranquility that results from at last realizing the game that was being played at your expense. Keep in mind that your recovery process is no longer solely personal. It is a generational issue. Additionally, your narrative is far from over, therefore you've only just begun. They will no longer have any influence on you. Unshakable certainty has taken the place of the naive emotion that began this entire trip. People want to hear what you have to say, so conversations that used to end when you walked into the room now begin. Opportunities that were previously out of your grasp are now attracting you like magnets. You might act like you want to, but you know deep down that it's karma. And the one who is chosen by karma always understands exactly what it is. If this message touched your heart, don't leave without spreading the light. Click like so this wisdom can reach more souls searching for truth. Subscribe to Holy Voices so you never miss the next divine word prepared for you. And write your thoughts in the comments, your voice matters here. Until next time, keep walking in faith, keep growing in wisdom, and remember, the journey of the wise never ends.